The Dallas Cowboys trading for Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver George Pickens. We figured that this was coming, right? When they make the trade for DK Metcalf, and it wasn't just the trade that they made earlier this offseason, they trade a second-round pick for DK Metcalf knowing that they then had to pay him. So then they give him a massive deal as well. George Pickens going into the last year of his rookie deal. So it would be tough to believe that they would ship off a second-round pick and pay DK Metcalf near top of the market money just to then pay George Pickens a lot of money a year later. That their team really isn't in that spot. Like, you could argue that was the right move for the Cincinnati Bengals, right? Because that wide receiver duo of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, I think people would tell you that that would have been a better wide receiver duo than what we would have hypothetically been talking about here with Pittsburgh anyways. And that's just a major focal point of why this team is a deep playoff team. That wide receiver duo wouldn't have really been a focal point of why the Steelers were able to win that division, get back into the playoffs, make some deep playoff runs. But anyways, the compensation. Let's talk about George Pickens. Let's talk about what it means for the Cowboys. Let's talk about what it means for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and really just sort of a trend that we're seeing with both teams and what that means before we get dig into our topic for today. So the Cowboys, they get George Pickens and then also a 2026 sixth-round pick, so a sixth-round pick next year. And then Pittsburgh, obviously trading away George Pickens, they get back a third next draft and a 2027 fifth-round pick from Dallas. And so it's a little bit of a pick swap, although the years are different. It's a pick swap of the fifth and sixth round pick that Pittsburgh actually got the better deal of. And then it is that third round pick for George Pickens and for the player. So Pickens was picked in the second round, pick number 52. I'm curious, let's start the discussion here because there's a couple of points I want to get to here. But was Pickens worth this in your opinion? This is a former second round pick number 52 overall in the 2022 NFL Draft. And I think that he was better than most people anticipated. Now, we can get into sort of, the antics that he has, the attitude that he plays with, some of the penalties that he has had over the last couple of years, but Pickens has raised his receiver grade every single year. It was, I believe, right around 75 in 2023, and it was almost 80. It was a 79.4 last season. He broke the 1,000-yard mark in each of the last two seasons, and he's obviously coming up on a payday. So I'm just curious, overall, a third-round pick for a wide receiver that is like that and who has operated as the wide receiver one for Pittsburgh, what are your thoughts on the value of that for George Pickens right off the bat, and then we'll get into the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, so top 25 receiving grade in 2024, and one of the more proven deep threats that we have in the NFL, especially with his size and body control, his ability to make those contested catches. I think for Dallas, yeah, it's worth it. It is. When you talk about a high-end wide receiver, too, who's clearly now the X-receiver on this team that is going to get vertical for them, it's exactly the reason for Dallas that we talked about potentially, say, in the second round, or maybe as high as the first round, them getting one of those X-receivers in the draft, right? Tetero, McMillan, Jaden Higgins, Alec Iamaner, all those guys that we talked about for that spot, because that's when this Dallas offense operates at its best, right? When they have an X-receiver that can get vertical. In the past, it was Michael Gallup, then it was Brandon Cooks. Even though he doesn't have the size, he had the speed to get downfield and open everything else up for CeeDee Lamb, for Jake Ferguson, for all those other speedy receivers that they have underneath. So I think for Dallas, it makes a ton of sense. I think so. I think this is the exact type of player they needed to add to their offense. I think Brian Schottenheimer now feels like, okay, maybe other than at running back, and they'll worry about that next year. They've got a couple veterans. They got Jaden Blue, who they drafted. But I think as far as on the outside now, he feels like they're fully loaded for Dak Prescott to succeed again. We have to remember, second in the MVP voting 2 years ago. 2023, he was fantastic. Obviously, last year had the injury and missed the second half of the season. So I think for Dak to walk back into a situation now where he's got a real X receiver in Pickens, he's got CeeDee Lamb, who's obviously one of the best receivers in football and just got paid, and then you've got a number of other ancillary weapons that can help you. This offense can be solid if Prescott's healthy. I think it was well worth it for Dallas. To me, I think I know there's a late pick swap, 2027, all that moving forward, the third-round pick. I think Dallas is the clear winner in this trade, especially when you consider the exact type of player that Pickens is and how he complements Lamb and the rest of the offense.
Yeah, I actually think it's a win-win. I do. I think that the Cowboys win because when you look at their offseason as a whole, and we'll get to their approach of trading draft picks for these, like former, second and first round pick guys. I do want to get to that in a second. But when you look at the fact that we gave their draft an A, and they didn't draft a wide receiver, right? I mean, they drafted, it was Tyler Booker in the first round, it was Donovan Ezraku in the second, and it was Savone Revel in the third. And we loved those picks there from them. So when you look at that versus, okay, well, the talk pre-draft was they were going to draft Tetairoa McMillan at number 12 if he made it to them. They were going to draft Matthew Golden at number 12. Obviously, Tet wasn't there for them, but every other wide receiver was, and they opted to not go wide receiver there. They, I think, had this trade or the idea of this trade in mind the whole time, and they went about the 2025 NFL draft thinking, if a wide receiver, if an in management and how they went about things. And then I also think that it was important for the Cowboys because you talked about George Pickens being a great deep ball receiver. They don't have that right now, right? And that was the reason why we talked about this team draft, why it would make sense potentially. I still think it would have been an overdraft, but why it was like, okay, I can see why Jerry would want to draft Matthew Golden at number 12 because that was a major missing part of this receiving core last year. They had CeeDee Lamb, but Jalen Tolbert hadn't developed the way that they wanted him to. Kevontae Turpin is a speedy guy, but he's much more of a special teams guy than he is like a deep wide receiver. Jonathan Mingo wasn't going to be that type of a wide receiver either. Neither was Ryan Flournoy. They had to get somebody who could win deep. And so I like the idea of going to get a player who can open up the offense and actually complement CeeDee Lamb because I do believe that that's what George Pickens does. Now, the reason why, that's the reason why it was a win for the Cowboys. The reason why I still think it's a win for Pittsburgh is because I think they got great value back for George Pickens given the situation. Remember, Dallas traded for this guy and he's on the last year of his deal. So Dallas is in a situation where they're not going to have to sign him to like top wide receiver money, but if they want to keep him, they're certainly going to have to sign him. And if not, then this is a pretty expensive 1-year rental to go get him and then just let him walk, even if you're going to get a comp pick back in the formula, which I'm sure that they talked about as well. But for the Steelers, I think the value of George Pickens lessened significantly once they made the deal for DK Metcalf, because I think every team in the NFL knew that Pittsburgh was not going to go into 2025 with both of these wide receivers because, one, the redundancy that was there, and the redundancy that was there in the style of player, how they want to win, the fact that you obviously just traded draft capital and gave a lot of money to DK Metcalf, this offense was not going to succeed with both of these players. And the reason why is because they didn't have the quarterback to do it. It's a reason why here on this show, we've talked about how skeptical we are of Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback of this team and everything being like, no, they'll be fine. Rodgers didn't want to hold on to the ball. Rodgers doesn't want to sit back there and wait for these deep routes to develop, exactly what DK Metcalf and George Pickens are great at. That would have been a disaster in my opinion. So I think the rest of the NFL knew the second the Steelers traded for Metcalf, they are getting rid of George Pickens. And I think other teams believed we can get him on the cheap. He's only got 1 year left on his rookie deal, and this team has to get rid of him. There's no way that they're going to go into next season with both Pickens and DK Metcalf. So I was wondering if the Steelers were going to get a 6th round pick back for this guy, a 5th round pick, and instead they get a 3rd and the better part of his pick swap in the 5th and 6th round over the next 2 seasons. So to me, that's also why this is a win for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I can see schematically and sort of a team building and what they needed for their offense, why it made sense for Dallas. But I also very much understand why this made sense and why I'd consider this a win as well for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
See, I'm not in the boat on the Steelers side. I think, look, I get what you're saying with Pickett and Metcalf and a redundant skill set, and it'd be a lot of deep balls and trying to get a lot vertically, and that's what they were last year, and it got them to a wild card berth and didn't do much else for them. But then you look at, okay, the void left by trading Pickens, especially after the draft when they didn't draft any receivers, and you go, the rest of their receiving core behind Metcalf is Robert Woods, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, Ben Skoranek. There's nothing else there. You're in the same spot you were in last year where you have one guy and nothing else. And to me, look, you look at it, okay, the pick swap is what it is. It's minor. You traded George Pickens and number 52 for DK Metcalf and let's say the 3rd rounder is something like number 85. I don't see where they win that in a vacuum. I know it's with two different teams, but they don't win that. And then, I sat here, and after their season ended, I said they need to have real discussions philosophically about what they want their offense to be, and I just don't think they've done that. I think now they're just a team with DK Metcalf making $30 million instead of George Pickens, and they still, right this minute, have no serviceable quarterback. I mean, they still only have Mason Rudolph and Will Howard, and they're waiting on Aaron Rodgers. But even if they get Aaron Rodgers at this point, you've got a quarterback in his 40s who was not great last year. You have one receiver, just like you did last year, maybe marginally better, but at the cost of getting him, okay, cool. You've got a young running back room that is okay. You got Caleb Johnson in the third. You have no idea who's playing or which sides they're playing at offensive tackle. I don't look at this Steelers team any different than I did at the end of last year. This entire process, and it's funny because you had even mentioned to me when the Metcalf trade went down, this probably isn't great business. And I said, well, I don't hate it if they actually were to keep Metcalf and Pickens and just roll with it. At least you have two weapons. And now that they've traded Pickens, I'm on your side where I just don't get it. This team is just going to continue to spin their wheels. Like, why not if you knew you were going to do this? And maybe they didn't know they were going to do this. Why then, okay, Derek Harmon's a good player and your D-line is stacked and it's set up for the future. Why not think about another receiver then? A Luther Burden, a Matthew Golden, a Jaden Higgins, a trade down for receiver. Like, I still, months later after saying this in January, do not understand what the Steelers want to do on offense. And until they know that, they're just going to lag behind when it comes to trying to win a championship.
But isn't that also evidence to why you would just want to acquire draft picks, right? But like I think you're looking at it short term, and I don't totally disagree with you. Like, Pickens not on the team objectively does not make them a better football team.
But even long term, what do they want to do on offense?
Because they have to, okay, but they have to establish who their quarterback is long term, right? I mean, you talked about last year, okay, they had a deep ball strategy with their passing attack. That's because they had Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson is screens or moon balls. They don't have Russell Wilson anymore. So okay. They don't even have the quarterback who could take advantage of even DK Metcalf. So look, I don't want to push that far back on you when it comes to not liking Pittsburgh's overall strategy this offseason, because I do agree with a lot of your points there. But for this Pickens trade specifically, this is a win for Pittsburgh. They were in a situation where I think the whole rest of the league basically thought, maybe outside of Dallas alone, that this dude was getting traded for a 5th or 6th round pick. I think they were dead in the water, given Pickens' attitude, reputation, certainly the penalties, which is funny. I'm going to get to the penalties in a second. But like the fact that they traded for and signed DK Metcalf, they were dead in the water with the value that they were going to get back for George Pickens. And to me, getting a 3rd round pick is actually really good work from Pittsburgh to somehow make this happen. So no, the team is not better because of this trade for 2025. I think the Steelers on offense are going to struggle no matter what. But if you kind of already know that, I'm great with stacking up picks for the future and just making it so whoever your long-term answer is at quarterback, you're actually building an offense around them no matter what. Very clearly, they believe that DK Metcalf to be a better centerpiece for that archetype of a player than George Pickens, which I would also agree with. I would rather have DK Metcalf than George Pickens. So that's my thing. Like, it sounds like you're hating on their offseason strategy, which I won't totally fight you on, because I also think that they're going to struggle this year. But in the vacuum of just this trade, for them to get a 3rd round pick back for them in their current situation, I think is a win for Pittsburgh.
I think it makes sense. Honestly, I think a 3rd round pick and probably a mid to late 3rd round pick, considering Dallas is probably going to be pretty good as long as they somewhat find some run defense there. I think it's fair value. I don't get the thing. If other teams thought George Pickens was going for a 6, I don't know what they were looking, because he is better than that despite what you might think about him. But then I just look at, okay, the long-term process then with Metcalf as your number 1 and eventually figuring out the quarterback. So you've got him on a 5-year deal, and yet this year is going to be wasted. A first year with a rookie next year, whoever that may be. I'm not getting into 2026 QB arguments. There's already too much of that going. But whoever a rookie might be next year with whatever they draft next year, and then beyond that, trying to develop it as Metcalf gets into his early 30s, I just the entire vision offensively for this team. I didn't know what it was at the end of the last year. We didn't really know what it was going into last year, just signing Russell Wilson and Justin Fields to try to figure it out, right? It just feels like they don't know what they want to be on offense. And that's the problem is I think even short or long term, you're not going to win in the AFC if you don't have a clear vision of what you want to be offensively, because you've got Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and Justin Herbert and C.J. Stroud and everybody else that you have in the AFC. They have all these quarterbacks. They have visions for what they want their offense to be, and the Steelers are still just the opposite of that, where they think they can just win games 14-13 every week, and I don't see any of this changing that. Look, the trade in a vacuum, a third-round pick for George Pickens, personally, I think is fair. Fine, that's probably an even trade in a vacuum. I just don't understand what the Steelers' vision is moving forward. And this year, even whether it's Aaron Rodgers or Mason Rudolph or what have you, okay. I mean, there's zero chance they're getting any further with that than they did last year. And beyond that, then they're still looking for a long-term answer, a quarterback that we don't necessarily know is in next year's draft.
Okay, here's the thing that just to let everybody know before we went live, I was about to tell Dalton something, and I was like, you know what? Hold on, I'm gonna save this for the show. George Pickens came into the league in 2022, and part of what you talk about with George Pickens is, he plays with a massive chip on his shoulder, plays with a little bit of an attitude. He gets some penalties, right? You can get some penalties to him. Since 2022, so the last 3 seasons. Who do you think leads the NFL for wide receivers? Who do you think leads the NFL in total penalties accepted against them? Who do you think it is since 2022?
I feel like you just.
This is not that much of a trick question.
Okay, well, I feel like you want me to say Pickens, but then there's another guy on the top of my mind that would make it funny.
Okay, who do you think it is?
Is it Metcalf?
It is indeed DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is number 1 in the NFL for wide receivers that have accepted penalties against them since 2022. George Pickens is 3rd on the list with 14. What makes this funny is, can you tell me who number 2 is? It's also very topical. You have mentioned this player's name already on this show.
Oh, boy.
It is CeeDee Lamb.
Is it? Oh, see, I wouldn't have guessed that. What's CeeDee getting in all those fights for? Getting all these penalties for? What is he doing?
They're not all unsportsmanlike penalties. I'd have to do some more research.
Okay, so this is just a trade that had to happen. They had to keep him with one of these 2 teams, of course.
Number 4 on the list is the player that you were talking about before we recorded the show, of who are the options now for the Steelers to maybe trade for and go get.
Oh, is it Allen Lazard?
It's Allen Lazard.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, Allen Lazard was good for 1 holding penalty a week for the Jets.
We're the whole conversation this morning, because guys in the chat, we were talking about, okay, like, what do the Steelers do now? Like, do they go out and get a wide receiver? Is Allen Lazard available? Do you go get a veteran? Whatever. And Dalton brought up Allen Lazard because people on Twitter were talking about him. The 4 wide receivers that we are talking about this morning are the 4 leading wide receivers in the NFL for most penalties accepted against them since 2022. I just think that's very funny.
Well, now Lazard's certainly going to find his way to Pittsburgh somehow once Rodgers signs. No question.
Yeah.
Just for that stat alone, you got to have dogs at receiver, and the Steelers and Cowboys certainly have them.
Metcalf is 1, CeeDee Lamb is 2, Pickens is 3, and then Allen Lazard is 4. I do think, like, honestly, like, a veteran, is it super ideal? No. But, like, if Pittsburgh went out and got Amari Cooper, like, I know it's not the Amari Cooper of old, but at least Cooper, like, kind of knows what he's doing, knows how to run routes, knows how to create that separation. Now, it's not a great look, the fact that, like, Buffalo traded for you in the middle of the season last year, and then when it sort of mattered for them into the playoff run, they weren't really throwing in the football. That's not ideal, but can he be the underneath veteran? Can you have him? Can Roman Wilson take the next step? Like, maybe that's something that's viable there for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But obviously, it's not going to be somebody that's going to be a major difference maker and somebody that's going to make a huge splash here.